Just wanted to have a quick visit with y'all in the press. We seem to see more than I would like to see, and I suspect it's vice versa. Or I don't know that it is, because y'all are the ones following me as opposed to the other. But anyway, a couple quick thoughts. One is a piece of housekeeping tied very much to the conversation had yesterday in Greenville on the David Thomas so-called investigation. And I just pass it on. I ask y'all to take a look at it. Somebody handed this to me last night. It's a LAC. Now, the LAC is the Legislative Audit Committee. It is put in place by the legislative body to overview and look at the executive branch. Things done right, things done wrong, things that could be done better. And what's interesting about this is a 2002 report and a 2004 report, again, by the Legislative Body Audit Committee. And what it says here, under travel expenses in 2002, we did not find material non-compliance with state travel regulations. And this is, again, fascinating because in it there were all kinds of business class tickets purchased. And the group that's responsible for looking to make sure that things are done right sits there and says, hey, things were done right. Which is, again, a far cry from some of these so-called investigations that we see going on in places like Greenville. And I just would recommend that to you all to look at, which I think is awfully, awfully telling when the Legislative Body Audit Committee itself, in looking at travel expenses back years ago, said everything was done accordingly. And this was during the Hodge administration when, again, plenty of business class tickets were purchased. So I just, as a piece of housekeeping, throw that out.
Governor, which report is that? Is it the Special Events Fund report? Or
no, it's actually on the Department of Commerce, and an administrative view of the Department of Commerce, 2002 and 2004, which is a 100% contrast to what, again, with all due respect to a politically motivated, or what some have suggested would be a politically motivated investigation out of Greenville, is coming out of with, my point is when somebody, particularly in a elected body, goes out and says one did something illegal, you really, really need to be looking and crossing your T's and dotting your I's to make sure that's accurate. And I think it, again, is telling when the legislative audit body itself comes out saying, no, there's no non-compliance, in that case in a Democratic administration or later in a Republican administration. Let me go to the point of what I want to talk about today for a few minutes before I run off. This administration has a long-standing history and commitment to transparency. And I would remind those of you who have watched it, and for those of you who don't know it, of 2003 when I came into office, we were able to pass record-breaking campaign disclosure. You know, prior to that, we were one of 3 states in the United States of America where you could give unlimited and undisclosed amounts of money to a political caucus. And we said, wait, whoa. I mean, that is the wild west of campaign finance. It had been vetoed twice by my predecessor, but we passed that bill, which was, again, a step in the right direction from the standpoint of transparency. In 2004, directed our cabinet agencies to stop this process of pass-throughs. It used to be, as you all know, John, there would be a amount of money given, let's say, to PRT or some other agency, but then back of the envelope, they would get notes from a committee chair say, well, we gave you so many dollars, but we want to make sure the money goes to such and such a place. And no public hearing, no disclosure into how the money got there, but this is where we want the money to go. And that was just sort of the accepted practice for a very long time in South Carolina. We said, that doesn't make sense. If you're going to spend public money, it ought to be publicly disclosed on how that's going from point A to point B. In 2005, we initiated online campaign disclosure. As, again, those of you who follow that story, we said it couldn't be done. No, we said, no, we got to get it done for this election cycle, and ultimately we're successful in working through the state portal and other places to get that done. In 2007, worked with Richard Ekstrom, the Comptroller General, to begin this process of online disclosure so that somebody from the comfort of their own home on a monthly basis could look at how their state money's being spent in South Carolina government. So we have done a long list of things tied to transparency. You could go to other things in terms of opening up cabinet meetings and whatnot, but we have consistently demonstrated a commitment toward transparency. There's still more work to be done, You know, we had this food fight, if you will, on recorded votes. We're able to get a piece of that done. I mean, our point was the most basic of all preconditions to the running of democratic government is to see how your legislator voted on an issue, whether you agreed or whether you disagreed with it. And yet the way the system worked was for a preponderance, in many cases, of the votes, you couldn't quite see how that person had voted. So they could come back and slap you on the shoulder and say, I'm with you, but I'm with you meant I could have been for it or against it, whatever you wanted it to be. And we were able to get a piece of that through. Nikki Haley and others were incredible legislative leaders on that front, but there's still some more that can be done on that front. We would say, you know, there's more that can be done on open records. This idea that public money will go to a quasi-private entity, but because it's private, they say, well, we're not subject to open records because, you know, we're private. Well, you took public money. It ought to be disclosed. We think that there's more that could be done with regard to public officials' income disclosure. It's something I did every year when I was in Congress. It's something I do as a constitutional officer. It ought to apply as well to the legislative body. But it doesn't work that way in South Carolina. So I will give public income disclosure. Richard Ekstrom will give public income disclosure. Other constitutional officers will give public income disclosure, but the legislative body won't. And so you could have certain senators making more than $1 million, let's say, out of certain things like workers' comp, and yet the public is not one out of the wiser as to where part of their motivation might be coming from on a piece of legislation. We think that that's important from the standpoint of transparency. But probably one of the most glaring deficiencies when it comes to transparency is on this notion of self-policing. And so I would reference a May 28, 2008 transmittal letter that we sent on a veto wherein Senate Bill 1085 and R285 basically required the House and Senate committees not just to investigate only legislative body, but to include staff. And our point was this is like the fox guarding the hen house, that self-policing doesn't work. The State Ethics Commission handles ethics complaints and administers sanctions against all public officials and employees except legislators. With the passage of that bill that we vetoed and it was overridden, it expanded to include staff. So you had this special exemption with regard to ethics, disclosure, and discovery, one system for the legislative body and now its staff with the results of that bill, and another one for the rest of all of state government. And it was for that reason that we signed the bill. I think it's telling what I said again, May 27, 2008. I believe the General Assembly should apply the same principles it has applied to the executive branch to itself and create a more objective process for enforcing ethics laws against legislators and their staff. In other words, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And I think the degree to which self-policing doesn't work is highlighted, again, by this so-called investigation by Senator Dave Thomas. I want you all to think about this. He goes out and says, you broke the law with regard to buying a business class ticket. Now, never mind the fact that that's been the practice for 25 years. Never mind the fact that it's been done that way for Republican and Democratic governors or Secretary of Commerce's or staff consistently for 25 years. But says, you broke the law. Now, what he leaves off, though, is it turns out there have been more than 230 of these kinds of tickets purchased over the last 25 years, and there's a certain rationale for doing so. But it turns out other senators had traveled on business class tickets as well, purchased by the state on these economic development trips. And I'm not begrudging those senators for doing that, or other staff, or other governors for doing that. But you can't have two systems. You can't have one system that says, I'm outraged over here, but when other members of the Senate were purchasing those same tickets, doesn't say a word. And it's even worse than that, because it turns out one of the three people, there are only three people on his subcommittee that are conducting this investigation. One of the three people is Senator John Land, who traveled on business class tickets purchased by the states on an economic development trip. I'm not begrudging Senator Land or his trip with Governor Hodges at the time on the economic development trip, but what I'm saying is self-policing clearly doesn't work if you got one guy going out and saying, in this case Senator Thomas, you broke the law, but not saying a word about other senators or one of the 3 senators on his own subcommittee who purchased the same kind of ticket. And so here's where I am. I'm going to waive confidentiality on the ethics probe against me, because my belief is we have an outstanding record with regard to standing up for the taxpayer and trying to do the right thing consistently. What I've said consistently to y'all is that my moral failure back in June, which has been more than well chronicled, I said more than anybody wanted to hear about it, I mean, laid it out there, that was mine. And consequences past, present, future on that front. But this other, with regard to expenditure on state money and airplanes and whatnot, is pure politics. And it's my hope that by the ethics committee going out, doing its investigation, us saying, by all means, let's share it, let's put it on out there, everybody can take a look at it, that the truth will ultimately be laid out on that front. But here's my challenge. That's what we're going to do. We're doing that, period. I would challenge the House and Senate to step to the plate and do the same thing. Let's change the system from one system over here and a different system for the legislative body. Let's have the same system for everybody, and let's have them waive their rights to confidentiality as well on the disclosure front. I don't believe that you can, in essence, be unequally yoked from the standpoint of 2 systems. And to a great degree, that's what a lot of the fussing has been about over the last 6.5 years of trying to change a system that says one system for the General Assembly and a different system for everybody else. I'm not picking on any one member of the General Assembly. There are some great members, House and Senate, within the General Assembly. But there is a broken system that has one system for one set of folks and a completely different system for everybody else. So that's where we are. And let me say to my friends in the press, some of y'all are friends, some of you are debatable, but anyway, we'll come back to that. What happens is really going to be in y'all's hands. In other words, the way it gets reported, it can be made into a circus, it can be made into a Mickey Mouse court if that's the way y'all report it. That really is y'all's responsibility. And one of the, frankly, disappointing things I've seen in several instances here over the last 60 days of my life as I've been through this thing is that in some cases it's not been about objective journalism, it's been about advocacy journalism with an agenda. And so I would challenge my friends in the media to really, look at, what are the real facts in this case? What is the larger context in this case? And to lay that out. And I not to pick on you, John, but what the heck. I look at, for instance, today's state paper. It talks about governor likely to do whatever, talk about ethics today, which indeed is what I'm doing here. On page 10, there's reference to me going to Greenville yesterday and talking about the David Thomas investigation. And what rightfully a lot of people set up that way, which is, this is more about him running for Congress and trying to get name ID and keep his name in the headlines than it is about finding the truth. And so what was interesting about what I found on page 10 was it was a lot of back and forth about the conflict, but not the reporting of the actual case that our attorney had laid out for him to look at. The fact that, again, there's a lot of data, in this case 5 pages worth, of substantiating the lawfulness and the degree of fidelity that we've had on trying to watch out for the taxpayer. And so, since y'all may have missed it yesterday, John, can I give you the David Thomas report again?
Sure.
Let me hand that one to you.
We saw it the day before, though.
What's that?
We saw it the day before, though.
Unfortunately, we did a report on it, though. And again, that's the larger point that I made, which is, you may have seen it, but the part that ended up in the paper was simply about the conflict. It wasn't about case after case after case of other staff members, other members of the legislative body, other members of administrations into the past doing that. And so I think we all need to hold ourselves and say, by all means, with confidentiality waived, that every person in this process has a responsibility. And there's some responsibility that as well rests with y'all in the media on that front. Those are my couple quick thoughts for the day.
Can you tell us if the investigation has begun, because you're waiving confidentiality? Can you tell us if it's underway?
No, I mean, not to my knowledge anyway. I don't know what they have or haven't done, but anyway, yeah. Okay, wait. So, I'm going to visit with some friends. I've said what I have to say with regard to y'all for the day. Hope you have a good day. What's that? What's that? No. Again, I'm going to visit with some friends. I've said what I have to say for the day. And what's that?
Did you report the private
John, we're not going to play your game. I don't work for you, John.
I'm asking questions.
Okay, I don't work for you. Anyway.